Welcome back to the Peggy Smedley Show, the podcasting voice of IoT and digital transformation.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the Peggy Smedley Show. I'm your host, Peggy Smedley. My next guest today founded a financial trading software firm which became part of the SunGard Data Systems prior to joining his four brothers in the company business in 1991. Today, Bentley Systems is a leading provider of software for those who design, build, and operate the world's infrastructure. Join me in welcoming Greg Bentley, CEO of Bentley Systems. Greg, welcome back to the show.
Cheers, Peggy, and I'm very glad to be back again to the Peggy Smedley Show.
You know, Greg, there's so much to talk about today, and I'd really love to get your thoughts on first of all, you just finished YII, which is always an exciting time. It's really a great time for all the things that are going on in infrastructure and everything. But I'd love to get your take in just what's been happening. We've been talking about infrastructure and the construction and operations. And correct me if I'm wrong, infrastructure right now accounts for approximately 70%, if this is correct, of the global greenhouse gas emissions right now. When you think about that, why is it so critical for us to be looking at why all of these things are happening, and we need to address infrastructure? We need to address everything that's happening around us right now. And I think we're at this critical juncture, and you're right at the pivotal point of every company. You lead it.
Well, Peggy, you've referenced our Year in Infrastructure conference, a virtual event we've just concluded. And this year of infrastructure is the year of concerns about environmental along with economic considerations. I think I don't need to explain to your viewers the climate science, but I would like to underscore, well, and then the scientific fact that carbon lasts a long time in our atmosphere. So time is of the essence in improving our environmental resilience. But I would like to comment that this is a particularly opportune juncture to consider that imperative in relation to infrastructure engineering. And on the one hand, there are these government investment programs across the world, not only in the United States, that are focusing on infrastructure investment. Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is the name we give this in the U.S., but it's a opportunity not to be missed to bring together the global consensus imperatives for environmental and climate improvement with new focus on investment in infrastructure. But something else we can say in our role at Bentley Systems, we say in going digital for infrastructure engineering in the world. We've just been through, I'd like to think we're through, the pandemic, where going digital really became essential for everyone working in infrastructure engineering, was virtualized, working from home. They discovered they could collaborate with anyone, anywhere, and work on projects anywhere, and so forth. Sort of increased the ambition of all of us in infrastructure engineering by way of going digital. And I'd like us to keep that momentum in going digital and apply it now to this challenge and opportunity in addressing the environmental concerns at the same time. The rest of us talk about and are concerned about climate. It's the work of infrastructure engineers. And Peggy, it's at least 70%. I sometimes see 79% of gases relate to. I suppose it's how one defines infrastructure. Of course, we have a generous definition of it at Bentley Systems, everything that's built to improve the planet. But all infrastructure engineers and those who work with them are very zealous about this. They're very challenged by it, but they're very optimistic about improvement, and especially in ways in going digital that we can especially make a difference there. So I'll remark upon, as you know, in our Year in Infrastructure, we have the Going Digital Awards, where our users they submit their own projects for judging in the hundreds of such projects by independent global juries. I don't know, Peggy, whether you're on such a jury or not. If not, we would like to recruit you. But at any rate, there were 56 finalists this year. The winners have just been announced. 13% of the finalists were projects specifically for renewable energy generation. And I think that's just representative of the portion of the work that is explicitly for climate advancement. But the rest of the work, because of the 70 to 79% of carbon that comes from infrastructure, the rest of the work of everyone, the quality of that work can be judged, and the engineers want to improve their own performance in climate resilience and adaptation. You know, the way we put it at Bentley Systems, every company and investor talks about ESG. They mean one thing by that, but I like to say in Bentley Systems, we work on, and ESG tends to refer to a company's environmental footprint. What do they leave behind in their waste products and so forth? For a software company, especially one virtualized, as we still are, that doesn't amount to much that's significant. But I say our handprint, how we help infrastructure engineers make a difference in the world's environment, is very significant. We have a tremendous responsibility there. We call that ESDG, so ES paren for empowering sustainable development goals. And we have the UN's sustainable development goals in general in mind. And part of our year in infrastructure conference every year, we would like to raise the profile and the deserved attention. The world should give credit to infrastructure engineers for making a real difference, for being very committed and very effective increasingly through going digital in making a difference here.
So it's funny, I'm looking at some of the companies that were founder honorees and winners, and we can talk about them because it's amazing the companies that you honored and recognized. And yes, I have been a juror in the past, and it's been exciting to sit and go through and what the work they do and the accomplishes. I'm just sitting here, water reclamation, you have, you know, and Jakarta and just the companies, Singapore, I mean, all over the globe that you do work with. And it's amazing what they do. And you get excited talking about them. I know you do. And I listened to your opening presentation as you talk about every year, you know, using BIM and the way things are working. But I guess from you, what excites me the most to hear you talk about is the work these companies do, the dedication they have to improving their companies, their countries, the plan and the commitment these workers have. You know, when we say that we have a worker shortage, but these employees that are doing these projects and the commitment they have, you know, environmentally, sustainability wise, or just trying to use technology, you know, digital twin. I mean, I can go on, you can go on, but talk about what these projects mean from your perspective so that people who might not have seen YII understand that they're just amazing. I mean, they're just absolutely amazing just to look at.
Well, these professionals want to bring their creativity and their work product to better quality of infrastructure as measured by environmental waste and especially resilience and adaptation to environmental threats and climate threats. And there could be this question, the digital twin is the extreme of this that I want to talk about a bit here now. And digital twins can be applied to improve the project delivery of infrastructure projects in ways which we talked about, especially on the second day of our keynotes in Year in Infrastructure. But, and by the way, this year, 26% of these finalist projects, these 56 finalist projects, credited our iTwin platform. So that's our cloud service for digital twins. So that's an advancement that's growing every year, but there's lots of headroom ahead. The reason that I'm particularly excited and our users are about digital twins to empower this transformation in our climate and decarbonization is that the most immediate contribution we can make to better infrastructure, if you like, measured by environmental quality, is from our existing infrastructure assets. So digital twins on new projects are important, but for our existing infrastructure assets, and here, you know, even when there's a lot of government money to spend And in the United States, it's actually law and legislation and real funding now, for instance. It can only add very slightly on the margin to the capacity that our infrastructure has. The great bulk of infrastructure we will have in the future exists already now, and the great bulk of carbon emissions and so forth has to do with our existing infrastructure. So the greatest opportunity in getting greener, if you like, is improving the throughput and performance, and we could say fitness for purpose changes of our existing infrastructure when we now need to be concerned about its energy transmission, its energy transition, its throughput. Can we accomplish greater throughput, for instance, in our mobility and transport and so forth, without needing new capacity that would require new carbon emissions and so forth? And these are the areas of concern, are the ones where you're right. Bentley Systems does lead in the software for going digital in infrastructure engineering in these respects. And just as you're saying, in terms of being excited, maybe I could go through a few examples of where this comes together, the digital twin opportunity and the environmental improvement imperative. One of those in mobility would be simulating our modes of transportation. And we have the leading products that simulate for planning, but then planning can now be done in real time with monitoring actual operating throughput of roads and bridges and even pedestrian simulation and so forth. Things like congestion pricing, where engineering can say, what can we do to have a commercial approach that reduces pollution and carbon and improves as well travel times and so forth. So we're sort of a leader in that mobility simulation. And then you mentioned water. So really that is so much of environmental concern has to do with water, and so much of the resilience we need to be concerned about for infrastructure has to do with flooding and hardening, potable water, but wastewater and so forth. And we're a leader in that respect, and are very impressed, as you have been, with, for instance, in that Singapore, the water reclamation plant and so forth, the advancements in water digital twins. But when we talk about water, the subsurface of the environment and concerns about subsidence and seismic risks, landslides and so forth are all part of extreme climate cycles now. And it gets to this opportunity for us this year at Bentley Systems, our acquisition earlier in this year of Sequent, the leader in the world in subsurface 3D modeling, if you like, deepening the digital twin to include the surveyed conditions of the subsurface, and where it's all about water permeation and environmental risks that have to do with that. So being able to put that all together, as our users now can do. And when we talk about subsurface, we get to geothermal, clean, green energy. When we're talking about energy and electrification, there are the mineral requirements that are more important in the world. Sequent is the leader in, and we are now, therefore, in subsurface 3D modeling for mining throughout the world. And then staying with energy, wind power is so important. You need to put together the geotechnical foundations for wind structures, which now most of the wind is offshore. So we have new offerings, open wind power for fixed offshore wind, but now especially floating offshore wind, where our leadership in offshore structures is now applied to this energy transition, not so much for fossil platforms, but for wind platforms. And then an example I'm very excited about, you know that so many of our finalists and winners come from China, where they really are serious about green capital projects. But one in particular, a solar project you may have seen, which is on a mountain hillside, where you need to start with a digital twin of the terrain, because every solar panel needs to be placed appropriately and connected appropriately. There are places where we can have solar generation perhaps that weren't feasible in the past, but that will be necessary in the future that digital twins make possible. And then sort of just to conclude with what makes me excited, as you suggest, about the matter is the most recent acquisition we've announced, will close, we hope, later this month, is of power line systems. So the leader in the world in energy transmission structures. So these are the transmission towers and the lines that have to be engineered together. Very interesting and challenging structural problems. But the transmission grid of the world needs to be extended to where the renewable power generation is and can be, which is largely offshore, a new place that our grids have to reach. And then as everything is electrified, for instance, electric vehicle charging, we need to fortify and increase the capacity of the energy grid by a multiple over the foreseeable few years. And bringing that together, the transmission and distribution and communications for an integrated grid, really have us excited at Bentley Systems. It's a responsibility we and our users are just very excited about.
Greg, when I hear you talk, I think what's exciting about all these, it's not only just the customer partnerships that you have of helping these customers do really innovative things, it's then the partners that are on the technology side. Things like you're doing, you have a partnership like with Siemens, I think, which is pretty and creative. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because they're not the only ones. You do a lot of things yourself. You make acquisitions, you said. You have customers that you're doing creative things, but you also have a partnership with, I think, Siemens that makes you stand out unique and do things like you're doing with iTwins and other things.
Well, it is a creative partnership. I think that's a good way to describe it. I say a digital co-venture with Siemens. We want to have our respective cloud services reinforce each other in the quality of infrastructure engineer that's possible. And Siemens itself has such a footprint and handprint in the world to be unique, to be challenged by, frankly. So Matthias Rebellius, one of the Siemens board members, was with me at Year in Infrastructure, and we talked about particular projects. We started 5 years ago now with joint research and development in cloud services for infrastructure digital twins. And today we go in the direction that our users and projects take us in and how to apply these digital twin cloud services to infrastructure. So one of the things we talked about was our collaboration on our open rail overhead line designer. So Europe, for instance, where Matthias is located in Switzerland, can't achieve its net zero goals unless until it electrifies the whole of the remaining diesel rail networks. That involves overhead line engineering across thousands of miles that have to be accomplished every year across Europe. And that had been approached with some specialized software, but now to make it part of our overall integrated environment for a rail digital twin, so that when you move anything else, the catenary structures move and so forth. It enables it to be done in a much more efficient way. There are some projects that have been started and abandoned because of the challenges of overhead line engineering, and Siemens is really good at the hardware, and now that we have a combined software offering. So that's one of the creative ways we've teamed up. In rail, the opportunity is to have more travel on existing rail networks without needing to do expensive and environmentally expensive as well capacity increases. You do that with more intelligent, we can use a digital twin of the rail network, as Matthias described, for instance, in the UK with Network Rail. And then we're doing projects together for what's called distributed energy resources. So this is the renewables generation, when each of us in our grid would say we'd like to connect solar panels or local storage or whatever. That has to be simulated in the grid. So our provisioning software used for that distribution can work with the Siemens analysis software for how electricity moves in two directions to in real time gain approvals for such a thing, to speed up the improvements to the grid. We talked about our plant site environment for operating process plants being applied now in water, for instance, in the U.S. by Brown and Caldwell, a very big project in Berlin where Siemens started for what they call Siemensstadt Squared, the redevelopment of a very major district through a campus digital twin that brings together the continuously surveyed reality mesh modeled existing conditions and the building improvements and energy improvements and so forth, because we use infrastructure in a different way now, even post the pandemic. The fitness for purpose of how we use, for instance, a district in a city, a campus, will have changed over the last few years. To have a digital twin that can grow and adapt and enable that fitness to be maintained is a new challenge, which we can now extend to campus digital twins throughout the world. And then Siemens sort of is at the frontier in the world of using infrastructure in a way to where their commercial model, we say servitization, where they are charged for the throughput of the infrastructure rather than selling the assets or the construction of that. And that's the ultimate frontier where digital twins will contribute most. So both we and I think Siemens are very excited by the new purposes we find with new challenges that come along, such as we've been talking about, to future-proof, if you like, our infrastructure, more so through infrastructure digital twins.
You know, I think it's exciting when you talk about this, Greg, because I remember when you first announced this, you're saying 5 years and it's gone by so fast. I mean, it just is exciting, just the things that you've announced with them, but other partners, because I think when we talk about what's happening in the market and the trends, you have to lean into these partners. You have to lean into the ecosystem. I think right now we're changing. I think you talked about it. The pandemic is changing the way we look at the market. We look at the way we partner with companies. How are things changing now? Is it the climate change that's making us think about things different? Is it sustainability? Is it the digital twin, your iTwin? What's making the way we look at our partners, our customers differently, making all of this? Is it just climate change? Our perception now that we understand that we've been destroying our ecosystem, we have to look at it. I mean, what are the things that you as a leader in the market helping to guide other companies now? You have to give guidance now to all your partners and your customers.
Well, Peggy, on this ecosystem opportunity, I'd like to go back to what we all learned by going digital as we did through the pandemic, to be virtualized ourselves. And so we learned that actually we can work not only with who are our office mates, but across offices, across ecosystems, if you like. We can collaborate with anyone with our software, such as ProjectWise and so forth. And we can work on projects that are anywhere. When we couldn't go onto sites in infrastructure engineering during the pandemic, we used surveying, such as drone surveying, which of course we call reality modeling. Our software processes that into a reality mesh model that can be continuously surveyed and kept up to date. We say a 4D as operated or as constructed model of infrastructure. So learning things like that, we can apply our expertise, more so any of us in infrastructure engineering, to projects and challenges anywhere in the world, including the energy transition and resilience and adaptation challenges. So an ecosystem.
Excuse me, Greg, did you learn with your customers? I guess that's it, and continue on. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I guess the question for me that as you're talking, because it's an important one. So did you learn alongside, or did you have to guide customers? Because I think that's to get more customers. It's an interesting point you're making.
I think it's more alongside, because our users applied digital twins in order to get their projects done when they didn't have a choice about operating the way they normally would have. They normally would have gone on site. But an example you may have seen that we mentioned, a Founders Honoree is a World Cup soccer for the junior players that will occur a year from now, and the infrastructure projects absolutely had to get done, but everyone was shut down, locked down, working from home. So they took a whole new approach that they otherwise hadn't considered, and everything went 3D and 4D with drone surveys to establish the digital context in which the project would take place. And use new 3D and 4D construction modeling to plan and accomplish safely, because you still have to distance and so forth. Construction is about the occupancy of space and time. So, and that became important, didn't it, during the pandemic, to maintain distancing and safety. And so a learning curve came about faster, I think, than anyone would have anticipated. And we have some examples of that we've learned and benefited from that are part of the Year in Infrastructure nominated, the Going Digital Awards process. But just generally, when we think of this challenge in environmental quality and improvement, and environmental quality doesn't stop with decarbonization. We have to make our existing assets more resilient. In fact, the pandemic itself is an example of something that couldn't have been anticipated. But the notion of future-proofing our infrastructure, when we have to use airports differently and train stations differently and our offices differently and so forth, if we have digital twins which combine their existing digital context, their 3D reality, with their engineering models and simulations, and we could say, well, what if we rerouted things differently, or can we put in partitions or whatever? What are the ways to maintain fitness for purpose when that definition changes? But fitness for purpose for our infrastructure now has to include resilience against climate threats, flooding, especially extreme storms. In the case of the electrical grid, vegetation encroachment that causes fires, and fires cause landslides. And so it's something where the digital twin, which we discovered, some did in the course of the pandemic because they were virtualized, turns out to make the work of engineers useful beyond one-time deliverables in a project cycle, to reuse during the life cycle, the evergreen life cycle of infrastructure, as conditions change, like climate conditions, flood threats, seismic resilience concerns, and so forth, and to continue to have the modeling and simulation done for the project be rerun and useful, kept up to date with infrastructure IoT sensors and so forth, the conditions of water and water levels and the weather and so forth. It's such a big opportunity for Bentley Systems. We realized our contribution should be a platform that brings together, if you like, the OT, the operational technologies, the continuously surveyed reality, where the software processes that into an engineering ready reality mesh. So you always can have physical reality. Then and then add to that the sensor inputs from infrastructure IoT, as we call it. So that's the OT. But to make sense of that, you need the ET, the engineering technologies, the models and simulations, which were previously trapped obscurely in the engineering formats. Now we open that up with a cloud service, semantically align it, and then synchronize it as the engineering information in models and drawings and simulations is kept up to date, and then change manage that. So we say the IT then to have the digital chronology go along with these digital components that are machine learned from the reality, the digital context. So being able to bring this all together, we want our contribution to be, in particular, a platform, cloud service, we call it the iTwin platform, for bringing together the OT and ET and IT for these digital twins. But there's so many applications, and they require and offer opportunities for new hardware and sensors and so forth. Monitoring and cameras and so forth are the most efficient sensors there are. So there's a whole ecosystem opportunity. We even have a iTwin Ventures fund, which is investing in startups in this respect. So the infrastructure and the way it affects our economy and environment is a matter of an ecosystem. The solutions to apply digital twins to increase the quality and the capacity while minimizing new expenditure, and when we have no choice but that the infrastructure of the future is the infrastructure we have now. We have to extend its life safely and securely and maintain its fitness for purpose. So this digital twin opportunity brings together so many aspects of hardware, sensors, cameras. Cameras are the most efficient sensors there'll be ever. That at Bentley Systems, we think the best thing we can do is help there be a cloud service platform, we call it the iTwin platform, to enable this ecosystem. And the ecosystem we won't even be able to imagine how many can participate in it in an opportune way. So back to ecosystems, the way in which our infrastructure affects our environment and economy is a matter of an ecosystem. The manners in which we can improve the quality of our infrastructure is also an opportunity for an engineering ecosystem where we simply want to be an enabler at Bentley Systems, as we say, empowering these sustainable development goals, ESDG.
So I have to honestly say, Greg, it's your humility and your candor as a company that I think why you guys are so successful. And I apologize for interrupting that question, but it was when you talk to you about this thing, about what you're doing, I think really indicates why companies come to you for why they want to look at infrastructure, why they trust Bentley Systems, because you're willing to say to them, we'll take the journey with you. When it comes to digital transformation, it's not a one and done, it's a journey. And I think they understand that. And when I ask you that tough question, you're willing to say, no, we have the answer. We're willing to take that journey. And I think that's why large corporations trust you globally, because you understand, even in a pandemic, we all have to, we never anticipated, and we all have to figure it out. And so I think that's a powerful statement when a CEO like yourself says that. So I think that's what was so interesting to hear you kind of say, look, we all had to kind of figure this out, but we were there to do it. So I think that's an interesting thing. So when you look at open platforms, isn't that kind of, you guys have developed the infrastructure, the resilience you're prioritizing. Talk a little bit about the open platforms, why that's so important. I think companies need to understand that as well.
Well, our strategy is to have an open platform. Now, open, you could say, means something to start with. The work of infrastructure engineers, of civil and structural geotechnical engineers, and the ones who are ensconced now in obscure engineering deliverables used once. So opening those up in a secure way through a cloud service to semantically align across projects and disciplines and spatially to make it visually immersible. And this new opportunity of the metaverse, the omniverse, and so forth are just accelerating this, because it's new ways to experience this last mile of the engineered reality of our 4D, I like to say 4D visualization, because we need the change management. It's not a digital twin if it isn't evolving both on the engineering information side and the physical reality side. So our approach is a platform to open up this dark data, allow engineers to become specialists in their own proprietary analytics, especially. That really is their future. The reason we go so far as to have an open source toolkit to take advantage is because the lifetime of infrastructure is so long, not only the projects, but especially the infrastructure assets, that it makes sense to want to future-proof the solution. The data associated with a digital twin of infrastructure is what's valuable. It isn't our data, it's the data that goes along with the asset and the owner-operator, and our open platform can assure that digital twin is future-proofed in terms of resilience and adaptation, if you like, to changing technologies and even changing vendors over the life cycle we're talking about. So we are committed, and in other realms, open platforms have worked out well. It should be even more so for infrastructure digital twins, given their generational durability.
Oh, that's an interesting point, the generational side of that, because do we have to look at things differently? Do we have to look at things when we talk about digital twin differently? Do we have to just kind of say, look, all of these implementations we're thinking about are all coming because the rate of adoption has changed exponentially in some areas. Do we have to think about that because of that, or is no?
Well, we think a platform choice is important because, as we were mentioning, ecosystem, the more open to an ecosystem, the more likely these new innovations are going to be able to be applied. Now, there are some who are working on infrastructure digital twins who are both in the business of the hardware and software, and there you're going to have more narrow bundles and have to sort of take a chance on those being. So we think working on the platform, having it be open, embracing an ecosystem, the scale of the opportunity will make that worthwhile for us and for the owners of infrastructure. Now, to create digital twins is itself an opportunity. We think so for the engineering firms of the world who have been their business model has been selling their hours on projects, but if they could instead be the creators and the curators of the digital twins, including for the existing infrastructure that they may have already engineered, and participate in proprietary analytics to better use that data to improve their throughput and resilience and adaptation and fitness. That's a great business model. We call that the digital integrator business model, where the engineering firms can do that for the owner operators. The owner operators need the values, the contributions of digital twins, but are not in their own right able to do the creation and curation of them. So we're trying to help the engineers of the world have a new and desirable business model opportunity through our platform as well, ultimately to serve the owner operators of infrastructure. And then all of us benefit as constituents of infrastructure from those digital twins to accomplish this future proofing that we're talking about.
Are we talking then practical steps, or engineering firms have these goals that they set up and they know what to do? But what about somebody who's not an engineering firm? Are there digital twin practical steps for implementation, the iTwin or that we're talking about here?
Well, Peggy, it was interesting at the Year in Infrastructure in my session. I had Andre Avellini, so he's the head of AEC Advisors. He had just brought together, actually we were able to do it physically, the heads of all the engineering firms in the world, representing half the infrastructure engineering, the CEOs, and we did a Going Digital survey of them that he reported on. And for instance, as a way to get started, they tend to be investing in R&D and intellectual property in ways now that prior to the pandemic, when really going digital became a necessity, but I think it's become ingrained now, the momentum to now not only continue their business as they weren't otherwise able to do without going digital during the pandemic, but now to improve their business. So one of the things that I was impressed by is that most engineering firms are now investing in UAV, in drone surveying, so that they can have the 3D and 4D changing reality, continuous surveying of the world's infrastructure. And that is not sufficient for a digital twin, but it's necessary for a digital twin. It's a good first step. And if we think of sort of where that can go as a next step, if you ask about how those who are considering what are the monitoring of infrastructure assets is really a compelling first business case for the digital twin. So, and I might say in the world at large, when we talk about resilience and so forth, of course, we had the catastrophe in Mexico City, which was a bridge failure in effect, but it had to do, we don't know for sure, but subsurface conditions, inspections, structural deterioration, things which sensors and a digital twin rerunning the structural model could have caused the interventions. Then in our own country, we had a 20-plus story building collapse, and now that has happened overseas. So to have a digital twin provide literally for monitoring and use machine learning for early warnings and intervention, that seems so compelling as maybe a use case that will accelerate the adoption in terms of these practical steps. But drone surveying, then you simply use our survey because drones result in overlapping imagery, which is what the software processes into a reality mesh. Then drag and drop the sensors for monitoring, and then bring in through machine learning, recognize the digital components and relate that to the models and drawings. That's a formula now being applied. I sometimes say the world's communication towers are, because of 5G, are the first to fully adopt this. We've had lots of new business in that respect, but it will go on to all of the world's infrastructure assets in stages over the coming decade or so. But we can help people get started now. If they're developers they shouldn't start from scratch. They should start with we think, our iTwin platform open source development kit, and we have a developer success program that they can find on our website and so forth. But there are ways to start are simply with, we say, 3D and 4D surveying, which are wonderful. And this year, 36% of the finalists in our Year in Infrastructure Going Digital Awards credited reality modeling. So the 3D and 4D surveying is becoming mainstream.
So if I'm hearing you, Greg, in my mind, the way I was listening to what you talk, it sounds like, when we talk digital twin and we're thinking like this, it's taking down the barriers between IT, OT, engineering, because we're seeing a lot of collaboration in ways we've never seen before. So is there, in your mind, advice to maybe getting started, or am I wrong about bringing down the barriers, or is all of it? Because it sounds like you must have great advice to getting started.
Well, our commitment is to a platform, and we think that's the way to get started, because you start then with applications. You don't have to be putting together the systems architecture, building blocks, and cloud services, and so forth. And our platform works with everyone's engineering data from everyone's engineering applications and everyone's surveying environment and change management. So 4D construction modeling is a way of getting started. Everything gets designed in 3D. Instead of dumbing it down to 2D for construction, you can expand it to 4D. These are all ways to get started that we can help with. And I would sort of suggest that to get some inspiration and direction, we do collect together these Going Digital Awards into a yearbook, and you can find and see them at YII, yearininfrastructure.bentley.com, and kind of see the momentum of putting this all together.
Well, I have to tell you, Greg, it's always exciting to have, talk to you and hear everything that you have to say. Greg Bentley, CEO of Bentley Systems, thank you for all your time. What I'd love to know, again, all the URLs, where is that where you'd love to send everybody? Is the YII URL you just mentioned?
We're at www.bentley.com, but the Going Digital Award nominations, finalists, winners deserve credit for what they're doing back to where we started here in enabling sustainable development goals, including environmental imperatives, the world consensus, and we like to draw attention to the great work of infrastructure engineers, and please help join us in getting them the credit they deserve, which, Peggy, you really very much help with, which we appreciate. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Greg. It's exciting to talk and hear about all the exciting things you're doing, and I'm sure this year will be just as exciting. So thank you again for all your time today.
Great. Look forward to coming back on the Peggy Smedley Show.
All right, listeners, that's all the time we have for today. But you know what we want you to do? We want you to tweet at us at ConnectedWMag. Remember, we're broadcast live every Tuesday at 12 p.m. Central. Check out our website at connectedworld.com, our show website at thepeggysmedleyshow.com. All right, this is the Peggy Smedley Show, the podcasting voice of IoT and digital transformation. And remember, with great technology comes great responsibility. Have an awesome week.